Everybody, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real-life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, here to serve all things clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things Bravo and more. And today, I am so excited to have a very special guest with me. Please help me welcome Lyndsay from Vanderpodrecaps. Welcome, Lyndsay.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I am so grateful for you to be here. And so, for people who don't know, Lyndsay has a very important, you really do the Lord's work on
Thank
Instagram.
you.
So, I know you have the Instagram account, you have your Reddit account, you have your TikTok account, but can you just share with us, with the audience a little bit about what it is that you do, because you're really so wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, so I had my son in August of 2022, and I was really battling some postpartum depression. And one things that I did to help with that, it was trying to find community, and that is around the time that Scandal broke. And during that time, I got on Reddit and all this information was coming at us at once. And it was a lot to take in. I had a newborn and I listened to podcasts all the day. So I just started to write up bullet point recaps and posting them on Reddit, and people really liked that. And listening to these podcasts, as you know, the cast members on Vanderpump Rules, they say some wild things sometimes. So
Yep.
I just started to transcribe specifically what they were saying, because I never want to take their words out of context.
Right.
And so I started posting more transcriptions of their podcast on Reddit, and then I made my Instagram, and it's kind of just blown up from there.
You truly, first of all, talk about one thing I adore about you is that, I feel like the most amazing people have a tough origin story, right? And so all of this came from a place of pain, which, by the way, can I ask, how are you doing now? And how, with your mental health, how has that been going for you?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot better. I have actually really appreciated, I know people are giving Scheana a hard time this season, but I really have resonated what she has said as far as her postpartum OCD. I I relate to a lot of things that she is saying, specifically with the safetiness of your child.
Mhm.
Mine more was very much with his schedule. I was very focused on having the perfect schedule. And if something didn't go right, I would be like, oh my goodness, what did I do to make this not go right? And just those intrusive thoughts, it's a lot. And so
Yeah.
that very first year of postpartum was very hard for me. What really helped me, which people might think of, is I have a fantastic pediatrician for my son who checked in with me and had me do rating scales. And she was the one that was like, something's up, which is funny because I've talked to you before how I've worked in the mental health field, and you don't
Mhm.
recognize it for yourself, because I was like,
Right.
I'm fine. Sure, I cry every day, but I'm
Oh,
fine. And so she
yeah.
was the one that really helped to recognize what was going on. And so through that, I was able to get into individual therapy, group therapy with other moms. And so, and again, finding this community on Reddit, that has really helped me. I can thankfully say mentally, I am in a much better place now.
Well, I am extremely happy to hear that. And I love you sharing your experience, strength, and hope with people. And I agree that, with Scheana, because of course today we're going to talk Vanderpump Rules, but, people can criticize her for a lot of things. But I do think that bringing awareness to postpartum, issues, period. There were so many people who were like, I didn't know postpartum OCD was a thing. And I was
Yeah.
like, yes, it's so real. So, part of why I'm happy to share your story and to talk about that with Scheana, is that it does just make women feel so seen and so heard, because there is such, I could get on my soapbox about this for years, but I won't. There is just such bullshit with how women are treated in the medical system after having children, and it's not talked about enough. It's not addressed enough. I'm so grateful for you that you actually had a doctor who like got it, because so many people don't. I've gone through a lot of cancer treatment, and only recently did I start getting questions about like, how's your mental health? Like literally it was never asked before. And I was like, that is bananas.
Yeah.
So I think that, A, I'm grateful for you sharing your story, but B, you really do, what I think is so amazing about your account is that you've actually now been featured on other podcasts and other accounts using your recaps. And the one thing I do love too about your recaps is everybody learns differently, right? So, like podcasts, some people are more auditory, some people are more visual, some people are more kinesthetic. So, for people who have varied learning styles or neurodivergent folks, your recaps are just like so important. But here's what I've always wondered, and like you and I, we're friendly and we chat a lot, but how do you actually do those transcriptions? Like that seems kind of tedious, and I'm like, so can you give me some insight? How do you actually do that?
Yeah, so I listen to the podcast on various speeds. I listen to it very fast at first to try to figure out what generally like what the podcast is about, and then I pinpoint things to actually transcribe, and then I slow it down. I basically just type out what they say. A lot of things with podcasts I notice, and I'm sure you've noticed too, is it's hard to speak for a long time. So I try to take out, things that don't necessarily make sense, or with Sandoval's, the boy loves to say like, and a
Uh,
lot. I can't give him too much of a hard time. I'm also a like kind of person. So,
mhm.
um, but his is, whew, it's a lot. And so
Right.
I I basically, yeah, I just listen to the podcast and then I just transcribe what they're saying. I try to make sure it flows well
Hmm.
and I only take out parts if I truly feel like it didn't add to what they were saying.
Right.
I never want to miscue things or take things out of context. But really, that's just what I do is I listen for key points to transcribe and then just make an outline of that. And it's like you said, it's been interesting because I never thought I'd have people messaging me who are deaf or hard of hearing and was like, I've never been able to enjoy podcasts before. And
Yep.
now I have this. Or people specifically, I get a lot of people who have ADHD
Yeah.
and they say podcasts are really hard for them to listen to, or they
Yep.
use my recap as an outline, which
Hmm.
I love that so much. Again, I just started this because it was something fun and like nice for me to do. And so
Hmm.
getting that feedback has just like made my heart grow so much bigger.
Of course, because sometimes, it's like there's a million accounts and podcasters and this and that, but when you're really doing something to help people with disabilities or limitations or just to make life easier for somebody, I mean, there's such amazing stuff in that. And what I love, and of course I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I can't listen to myself because I'm like, Melissa, could you say so one more time? Could you? Like, what are you doing? So sometimes we don't realize these verbal patterns that we have, but I like that you take out essentially the superfluous stuff, the so's, the ums, the whatever, and you just give the straight up content in a way that makes sense for people. So bravo. Thank you. And
Thank
so I
you.
do want to plug you right now because I feel like at the end people just like tune out. So on Instagram, please follow her at Vanderpodrecaps. You're also on TikTok
Hmm.
under the same name.
Yeah, it should be just Vanderpod recaps as well.
Now on Reddit, do you want to share that name, or would you rather
Yeah.
not?
No, I
Okay.
can. Just, I always say this, I did not make up this name and I cannot change it. But if any time you see additional war 8759, I always say people are going to think I'm some white Republican man. Couldn't couldn't be me. Did not make the name,
I'm
but
dying. I'm dead. Okay, so that's you. It's not some, wildly inappropriate guy. Okay,
nope.
great. You know, and here's the funny thing. There are people on Reddit who really don't like me, so I really stay off.
Oh my God. Reddit can
People are
be,
so mean to me there.
yes,
So
people can
awful.
be, it can be a beautiful place and it could be the pits of hell because I even got a comment today that was saying, "Wow, you typed this all out. Seems like obsessive or excessive." And I was just like,
Yeah, okay.
I'm not even going to, give into that.
Right.
So
Right.
it is interesting how it can be a place for people to really come together. But man, if you have any sort of different view or something, someone doesn't like what you're doing, people will destroy you.
Oh, yeah, I had to delete the app
Oh,
because
wow,
it was
yeah.
it was actually getting bad for my mental health.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
here's the thing, I understand not everybody's going to like me, but there's a difference between not
Sure.
liking someone and really like hating them and threatening them and all these things. So, I'm not going to get into that anymore. I don't want to give that too much light, but
Yes.
you're a light all over the all over the place. So, thank you
Thank
for that.
you.
So everybody, what we're going to do today is we're going to get into Vanderpump Rules. We're specifically so here's how this all occurred. Lyndsay and I had talked about Scheana went on Jeff Lewis Live, which I feel like Jeff Lewis Live is where all the drama happens all the time.
Yes.
And in fact, like I covered him once, well, and some other people, and I got so much vitriol that I was like, and I'm not doing that again. Yeah, like the fans are really passionate.
Wow.
And I don't even think I said anything that bad, but whatever. So she went on Jeff Lewis Live and she made some comments about therapy that just set me on fire. And you and I, you did a recap of it, and I had commented, and then that's how you and I came together to say, okay, I think we really need to address this. So, and for those listening, they know that I'm type A, but Lyndsay is also type A. So we have outlines on outlines on outlines, and we have the actual transcripts of what was said. So Lyndsay's going to share that part. I'm going to share the part about, the clinical interpretations of it all. And it's going to be great. But before we get into that, I have a very exciting announcement that I'm actually scared to say right now. So, yesterday I went on Rachel Goes Rogue podcast. And so I cannot, as we record this, the episode of Rachel Goes Rogue is going to air sometime in the next week. And this podcast is coming out on Tuesday. So, out of respect and, just appropriateness, I'm not going to share what we talked about or the topic or anything like that. But I did just want to, let people know that it was the wildest experience. It was so wild and so surreal. And I just was really excited to announce it and just chat a little bit about it.
Oh, that is so, so exciting. Was it the surrealist moment of your life?
Truly, yes. I mean, truly, yes, because I cannot emphasize enough. Like, people think a lot of things about me, that I'm confident, that I'm so important, and I'm this and I'm that. But I'm just like Melissa. I'm just like a girl from the Midwest that dedicated my life to being a therapist, never thought I would do anything different. I never took acting classes. I never was interested in being in the limelight. And in fact, I joke that the more my podcast grows, the more scared I get
Yeah, it's
because
scary.
the more eyes that are on me, the more vitriol, the good and the bad, right? That's just humanity. So the double-edged sword of being successful, which truly I never in my wildest dreams, like if you would have told me during the height of Scandival that I would be going on Rachel's podcast, I would have told you were on drugs. I would have been like, you're either on a substance or you need to look at what's happening for you right now because that is not conceivable.
Yeah. Well, and I know you talked about how surreal it was when Kyle Richards reposted your post on her stories.
Oh my God.
So you have that,
Yeah.
which was absolutely amazing. And then you have you're on freaking Rachel Goes Rogue, which while people like to say they're not listening to her podcast, a lot of people are. And honestly, right now, her podcast is where I get the most engagement from. People are interested in what she is saying.
And Lyndsay, what occurs to me that's so bizarre as we sit here and chat is like, you, my friend, my fellow content creator, my buddy, you're going to be covering me.
I know.
And that just feels not right. Like, that doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, it feels when
It's
you
weird.
told me that you were going on it, then we both were like, wait, I'm gonna be recapping both you and Rachel. It just is so weird. I don't know.
So weird. It feels like a fever dream. It feels like a acid trip. I cannot even begin to say how weird this feels. So, and I can just say that I'm I'm a mix of excited but also extremely nervous about the tidal wave of attention that's going to come my way.
Yeah,
And like, reading about me on your recaps or whoever, it's a weird experience. It's very meta. It's very like, I'm just a regular gal. I know who I am. And then when things like this happen, like when Kyle reposted me, everyone was talking about me. I was everywhere. I was on, Reality Blurb and these publications. I've been quoted in the New York Times about Kyle and like all these wild things. And I'm just like, I I'm trying to take it in and
yeah,
appreciate it. It's just wild and weird and exciting. So yeah, that's the announcement, y'all. So just so
woo,
just obviously when that episode goes live, I will be posting about it everywhere. So yeah, I guess that's I don't know what else to
yeah.
say about it.
No, what a great learning opportunity for you too, because I've told you this before. I just see your I love what you do, and I just see your Instagram and podcast getting bigger and bigger. And I feel like this will be, I know you talked about how nervous you are, but I think
Mhm.
this will be a great way to realize how to navigate all of this too, because I think this is going to be big. But I'm so proud of you and I'm so excited to listen. I think it's going to be great. There, like you said earlier, you're not going to be able to please everyone, but what I appreciate about your content is you are just very much, you know, you say what you think and you also provide a lot of education and research, but you're also never going to um I guess how do I say it? Like put your I lost my words, but the way
You're
that you
like, I
do
don't
things.
eviscerate people. Like I'm not,
Yes.
yes, I'm not trying, I'm trying to do good. I'm not trying to eviscerate people. I'm not trying to take these shady stances.
Yes, and
Yeah.
you didn't go on Rachel's podcast to be her therapist. That's what I
No.
appreciate about your content is what I was going for. You're
Yeah.
very educational and aware of what you do and also aware of you do in a way how you can use what you know and what you've worked for many years and provide that into the Bravo world. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And truly, I get a lot of DMs about people who say, my therapist recommended I listen to your podcast, which blows my mind. Or,
I
you
love that.
I was like, oh my God, I'm so honored. Or, I would have been in therapy for years and something you said triggered this and it led me to, so for me, I don't want to ever lose sight of that is why I'm doing this. This isn't
Yes.
about me. I don't want to be famous. Actually, like I totally do understand people like, Sia, the singer who like
Hmm.
always like hid her face and stuff. I understand it's like this weird desire to maintain some sort of anonymity, but also like do the work and be helpful, and you can't have both.
Right.
So for now, I will take those words and the words of other people, and I will just let them sink in and appreciate them and brace for the impact of,
Yeah.
the vitriol that I'm going to get. And that's okay. That's okay. Because at the end of the day, all we can do is like when you put your head on the pillow, am I proud of who I was today?
Yeah.
And, what I can say with Rachel is that as a therapist, when, I'm not her therapist, but you're accustomed to meeting with people who have done things that are not good. But
Yeah.
when you're trained to see the humanity underneath somebody, it's very easy to see them as a human and meet them there. And I'm sure there's some people that just, won't like that. But those are
Yeah.
my morals and values. I'm not some weird shock. Like, I'm not going to try to shock her or say something rude. That's just not for me. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for everybody to listen, and I will keep
Yes.
everybody posted. Okay, so let us get into the meat and potatoes, as it were, of the podcast. So, why don't we start, Lyndsay, with what Scheana, so how Sheena's doing right now with her postpartum OCD. Do you think we should start there?
Yeah, because I think that's what brought this topic in our mind.
Right. Okay. So do you want to go ahead and read the quotes and all of that?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
I guess I'll
perfect.
do that. And then just to give people background, which we are seeing on this season, Scheana last year talked about how she got on Zoloft to help with her mental
Right.
health. And
Right.
so Jeff Lewis asked how she was doing right now with her postpartum OCD. And Scheana, I quote, say, a lot better. I do give a lot of that to the supplement program that I'm on with Dr. Amen. I got on Zoloft last summer, maybe around June. You'll see this season that I come off of it during the season because I felt like before my body gets too dependent on an SSRI, I want to try something more natural. I had so many people telling me about microdosing, and I was also really interested in doing that, but I wasn't going to microdose while being on Zoloft. So that is one thing. When Scheana got on Zoloft, she said that she wasn't drinking, she wasn't smoking weed.
Right.
She really wanted to see how the Zoloft was working. And then she says, so I weaned myself off Zoloft, gave myself a couple months to just have that completely out of my system, tried microdosing. It wasn't giving me the same relief that I thought it would. It is not like when you take mushrooms at a festival, it's nothing like that. And I felt like it just, I really, she's starting to get emotional and have those intrusive thoughts again. And this is where me and Melissa lost our shit.
Yep. I was like,
She's
what the fuck?
So Sheena said, so I went, got these brain scans, and now he has us on these different pills because I'm OCD, he's ADD. So she's talking about herself and Brock. And he was just balancing our brain chemistry. So Dr. Amen was apparently balancing Brock and Sheena's brain chemistry. And so now she's on Happy Sovereign Plus, newer link, and a brain and body power pack. And so she said it's like 17 pills a day, which is annoying, but she feels mentally stronger. She does have less intrusive thoughts. And then kind of tying that in, she did say on another podcast too about how her and Brock, she specifically talked about in that one, how her and Brock, they were arguing a lot, and then they both met with Dr. Amen, and they were going to do an individual therapy. They went to like one session, but then they met Dr. Amen, and he got their brains to align, so now they don't argue as much.
Rage. No, I mean, I'm just kidding, but kind of.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot to take in because it there's good substance, right? Sheena, I feel like, was
Right.
very open about being on Zoloft, and I know that is it's a lot for people to decide to get on medication, and medication's such a beautiful tool.
Mhm.
But then to describe wanting to get off of it, which again, everyone has their own journey, but then to talk about Dr. Amen.
Yeah, so that's where I come in here because let me be clear, and people who know me know I'm not going to judge someone's journey. Okay. I give Scheana a lot of credit for, right, exploring different ways to get well. I think ultimately we have to have some bravery and courage and maybe get out of our comfort zone to do things to get well. But there were some messages here that were for me really damaging and concerning that I just wanted to address. So first let me address the Dr. Amen of it all. Okay. So who we're talking about is Dr. Daniel Amen, MD. He is on Instagram as doc underscore Amen, Amen. Okay. And his page, he's like brain health with Dr. Amen. Okay. So I follow him. You know, he seems to be a smart guy, posts a lot of really great content. But when Scheana had said this, my therapist brain red flags just went bing, 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 bing. So I did a deep dive into Dr. Amen, and I'm going to share some limitations and concerns of this approach, right? Because I think the approach is valid in addition to other things. Like what I will say is with wellness approaches, it's not just one thing, right? It's not
Right.
just therapy and nothing else, or it's not just medication and nothing else, or brain health, right? It's like it does take a village of people and tools,
Yeah.
right, to get well. But Dr. Amen, so he has a clinic, he has a book, he has his own supplements. I feel the red flags just get more and more as I go through this list. So he has his own
Yeah.
supplements. He has a 10-day challenge, and he has something called Amen University. And this is where I'm going to point out something that I actually talked with some of my therapist friends about this because my goal is not to try to roast this person, but I do feel that there are certain folks on social media that there is taking advantage and offering approaches that I don't believe makes sense. So, for example, he guarantees 6 weeks to overcome anxiety, depression, trauma, and grief. Um, of, so, of course, he sells these courses. They are
Hmm.
$499, but when I recently looked, they were on sale for $149. Right, 149. But
Wow.
here is what I really have a problem with. When I looked through, okay, so what is this content, right? I really wanted to know, like, this doesn't sound right to me, but okay. There is only 7 hours of total content. So yep. And it's
Oh.
right on his website. So if you click on his website and you go to Amen University and
Hmm.
you go to, I want to take this course, it says in super small fine print, 7 hours of content. So yeah,
Wow.
your reaction, Lyndsay, is like,
Well, it's just like if I knew, because I'm someone who has struggled with depression, anxiety, if only I knew I only need 7 hours of content to help with
yeah.
that.
And, as someone who's had a lifetime of trauma and I do weekly therapy for years, I guess there's something wrong with me that I'm not better in 7 weeks. Like, it's icky. It feels like gross. And, I did talk to my other therapist friends about it, and the consensus is this is quackery. You
Yeah.
cannot, especially people. Now, listen, there might be some people, and I'm going to be clear about this, who have a post-traumatic stress disorder can be acute or can be long-term. Okay.
Yes.
So an acute PTSD incident, depending on what it is, this may work fine for that. But I would argue that it's snake oil sales, and I don't like it. I don't like it.
That's so funny that you say that because when I was doing the research on him, that's all I saw pop up with this name was snake oil sales. That is very much
Oh,
used. Yeah,
that's interesting.
specifically that is used to describe him. It's just it's also the privilege with all of this too. And I know you
Right.
mentioned the cost of was that the cost of a book was the for well now on
Oh,
sale?
no, no, no. So the cost, so everything has a cost and
Okay.
they're all additional. So the course itself was 149 just for the course. The
Yes, okay.
book is its own, the supplements are their own. Mhm.
Yeah, I was when I was researching, I was seeing about anywhere from like all together with everything that this man includes about 4 to 5 grand on the
Yeah.
low end,
Yep.
which is insane. And as me and you talked about, therapy in itself, as far as the privilege that can come with that and accessibility, and even the cost of regular therapy deteriorates a lot from people to go to therapy.
Right.
But this is a book, a supplement program, a 10-day challenge, a course, and you have
Yep.
all this, and there's not, and you'll get into this, there's just not a lot of science to back this up. And that does not mean that everything has to have science to back it up. We do
Mhm.
things that feel good to us and that help us. And
Right.
we understand that. But again, just the way that this doctor comes out these things of I can balance your brain basically or align your brain and your partner's brain by
Right.
doing this course, it's just wackadoodle.
It is. It's so wackadoodle. And, there's a couple quotes that she said that he said that I wanted to address. He said,
Mhm.
please hold off on couples therapy until I get your brain chemistry right, which I'm like, what? And then he said, I've kept couples out of therapy. And so here's what that tells me that tells me that he has an agenda.
Yes.
And I don't like that because as a therapist, therapy is a privilege and it is not accessible to everybody, as you mentioned. And I'm not going to pretend that therapy is the only option or, there are some people that it just doesn't work for, and that's
Oh,
fine. But when you make a statement, I've kept couples out of therapy, that is such a weird statement and so inappropriate. Like, because
yes.
brain health, you can work on brain health all you want, but to get true, lasting change that is not only lasting but also successful you can't use a passive approach. Like, I just kept writing all over my notes, like active participation versus passive participation. And some of what we're going to talk about today is how some of these Vanderpump Rules folks do half measures when it comes to self-improvement, and then they get frustrated about why they're not better. But
Well, and
so
there's oh, sorry.
yes, no, 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 please go
No,
ahead.
there's the way he's wording this, I've kept couples out of therapy. There's nothing wrong with couples therapy. It can be a beautiful tool, and a
Yeah.
lot of times people go a really good time to go to couples therapy is when there really isn't a lot of issues going on. You're just a lot of
That's
people
right.
do it as preventative measures. And so
Yep.
it could be such a beautiful tool. And what's so interesting with Scheana is and we'll get more into this, but she is in individual therapy. She has done EMDR. But when it comes to couples therapy, there's some kind of disconnect. And we see this with other VPR people
Mhm.
because we saw her with her and Michael Shea. She said, we went to one couples therapy session. That's all we needed. She said the exact same with Brock. We went to one session on the show and it didn't air. And so I would love to know, it seems like Scheana kind of has this stigmatization that has
Yep.
been in her brain when it comes to couples therapy. So then you have a doctor who specifically says, I
Yep.
can keep you out of couples therapy. I don't blame Scheana for being like, light bulb, great, this is for me.
Right. That is such a great point. And stigma is the word. What I don't like about this, and this is less on Scheana and more on Dr. Amen, it's perpetuating this bullshit stigma that couples therapy is is shameful. Listen,
Yes.
I'm someone who's provided couples therapy. And what I can tell you is that people come into couples therapy usually at a point where things are so far advanced
Yeah.
that it's hard to do a lot of work. And I believe that if there was less stigma and more support, not only for couples therapy, but therapy in general, the best time to start therapy is when there's not a crisis, is when you're
Hmm.
starting to notice little things and you're like, you know what, let me tweak this. We don't have to wait for something to be cancer to address it. Right. And as a cancer patient,
Right.
that's just a good analogy, right? It's like, well, do I want my cancer to like super progress before I actually do something to treat it? Or should I
Yes.
maybe like be a little bit proactive? So yeah, I think that's really wild. And the one of the other things that Scheana said was, before my body gets too dependent on an SSRI, I wanted to try something natural. And I just want to be clear that LSD is not natural. The word natural has been co-opted in like the grossest, weirdest way. And so again, here's the thing. If Scheana medication management no longer worked for her, I'm not judging that. Only she and her practitioner know what is best for her. And I will give her credit that she did seem to do things the right way. You do have to wean off under a
Yes.
doctor's care. There are serotonin syndromes that can happen if you stop taking an SSRI too quickly. And I also appreciate that she gave herself a few months to like regulate before trying, right, psychedelics. But what I want to say is that for a lot of folks, myself included, I'm going to be honest about this. I'm on Lexapro. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And for me, it's an important part of my treatment regimen. And so I want to remove again the stigma from that of, again, well, we don't want to have to do couples counseling. I don't want to have to be on this medication. And it's like, would you say that if you had diabetes? Right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have I have a chronic cancer and I'm on immunotherapy for the past 4 years. I need it to keep me alive. So I just want to speak to that stigma for a moment and let people know that there's nothing. Not only is there nothing wrong with an SSRI, they are life saving for a lot of folks, myself included.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is Dr. Amon's intention, but again, when you talk about all these quote unquote natural substances, supplements, and things like that, I feel like again it adds to the stigma of these really great medications that have saved people's
Yeah,
lives. And again, like you said, they're not for everybody,
sure.
but it just is, I don't know, just the way it just seems the motivations behind what this man is doing is
Right.
feels icky to me.
Well, right, because it's like here's the thing, like if I'm selling something, right? Aren't I going to be a little bit more likely to like urge people to go that away? I mean, listen,
Exactly.
I don't think I would because my morals and values are too strong. Like I could never be that person. Um but yeah, I think that's a really important piece to be said. So let's move to I want to talk a little bit about the maybe psychedelic assisted therapy,
Yeah.
because I did a lot of research, as people who listen to this know I like to do. And I looked at a couple of journal articles, and research studies, because here's my message is that I am not opposed as a practitioner to whatever people feel that they need to do to get well. And there is some research and studies coming out about the use of psychedelics to treat trauma, right?
Mm,
And here's the thing, I'm all for anything that can help trauma survivors move through their trauma, but it's not black and white, and there are dangers and there
yeah.
are cautions and there are things that we need to be aware of. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'm just going to share a little bit about where I got this information if you guys want to look that up and kind of what it is. um, so the source is the efficacy of psychedelic assisted therapy in managing post-traumatic stress disorder, a new frontier, question mark. So what is it? So when we talk about psychedelic assisted trauma therapy, we're talking about MDMA, we're talking about ketamine, we're talking about psilocybin, we're talking about LSD, which is lysergic acid diethylamide. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that is the name for LSD. And then also THC and CBD. Now, THC and CBD are also being studied. I don't necessarily see them as psychoactive, but I guess the cannabinoid process, they're studying the same neural pathways, essentially,
Hmm.
right? So, psychedelic assisted therapy involves a different approach to treating PTSD. It includes an evaluation by a medical professional to ensure safety, a few sessions to prepare the patient and build rapport, and 1 to 3 sessions, which are 6 to 8 hours, where the patient is under the psychedelic influence. And then there are integration sessions where the experience is processed and explored. The positive outcomes of these intensive treatments are likely due to the intensity of the interventions themselves. So that is one thing that's really important, is that when we're looking at this critically, it's like, well, could it be the psychedelic? It definitely has effects on the brain, but when you're looking at those sessions, that consistency, the rapport building, the processing, that's therapy,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah.
it's like, you know, to me, the big part of what helps it has a lot to do with that in and
Hmm.
of itself, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is.
Um, So it says careful consideration must be given to how it can be integrated into the existing healthcare system in a way that is fair and accessible to everybody. Because again, that's a thing with treatment modalities; it has to be fair and accessible for everyone. So I'm going to
Right.
explain briefly how it works, and then some of the limitations, and then we can chat more about that. So the exact mechanism by which psychedelics produce changes in perception and cognition are not fully understood. And that's because, right, it's a burgeoning subject of research, right? We're learning, we're growing, this is new. You need clinical trials, and you need participants, and you need, all of these things in place to study this. And that is starting to happen, but we're not there yet.
Right.
It says, however, they may involve reduced activity in the brain's default mode network and increased functional connectivity between different brain regions. The neural networks, cingulate, insular, prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus, that involve neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and glutamine, are altered in PTSD due to trauma and potential genetic susceptibility. The endocrine and autonomic nervous system are subsequently impacted by these network alterations, which results in the physiological and subjective symptoms of PTSD. So essentially, what it's saying is the neural network and subjective levels of this process are where this therapy has had the most observable effects. But the one important thing there is subjective symptoms, right? So,
Hmm.
what does this mean in lay terms? The lay terms is that it depends on the person. It depends on the person, and then what comes into play here, which, I don't want to bore people to death because I know this is technical, but epigenetics come in huge here, because one of the limitations of this is that not only are there limited research and clinical trials, a crucial topic that needs to be investigated is contraindications concerning particular symptom clusters and personality traits. So, from a therapeutic and a neurobiological standpoint, there's a need to better understand the psychological states that these substances can induce. So, what is that? We're all born with these genetic predispositions that certain life situations can turn them on and off like light switches, right?
Hmm.
And so, what this is saying is that if someone is predisposed to a psychotic mental health background, or, who they have a certain type of personality disorder or what have you, is that these psychedelic treatments can negatively impact folks in ways that we don't fully understand. And I know
Yeah.
that's a lot. So, I don't know, is there thoughts on that, or, what do you think about that?
I think it just shows, specifically with the mental health field, when it comes to research, it's hard because everyone is so different. You have you said that you have been diagnosed with complex PTSD. I've
Right.
been diagnosed with PTSD myself.
Hmm.
And we would have different reactions to things. If you,
Right.
specifically with Dr. Amen, which we can talk about, he uses these brain scans, and we can
Right.
specifically get into that. But there's always a meme that goes around on Facebook that I can't stand. It's like, this is what a depression brain looks like. This is
Ugh.
what an ADHD brain looks like. And I think the reason why this is starting is because there's been such a stigma on mental health not being real. These
Right.
things aren't real because, when you go to the doctor, you can get blood work, you can get scans, and these things you can easily see. But
Hmm.
even though me and you may have the same mental health disorder, we can get brain scans. Our brains are going to look totally different.
A
There's
thousand
been a
percent.
lot of there's been
Yep.
a lot of research where doctors and psychiatrists are trying to look at brains of people who have mental illness, but this study, it would have to be huge. You would have to have
Right.
so many people
Right.
because the way that trauma affects us, everyone is so different. And
Hmm.
so when I hear about these studies, specifically with like psychedelics, look, as you mentioned, I'm all for people doing what they
Hmm.
need to do to help them, as long as it's safe
Hmm.
and it helps them. But this is just something where I don't see how far it can go. It also, I mean, then it raises the question of, these drugs are involved. So again, with, how our government and stuff looks at that,
Right.
that opens up a whole other can. But it just, again, it goes back to this, it affects us all differently. So there's a lot of limitations with that.
Absolutely. And you know what I have written here is that the bottom line is people, we're like snowflakes. We're all different. And not the
Yeah.
snowflake, the nasty, rude term that
Yes.
people like to say. I don't mean
Yes.
that. Just in case people were assuming. I just mean that everybody, to your point, Lyndsay, is your trauma and my trauma, they're both labeled PTSD, but they're different traumas, and your brain is different than mine, and your epigenetics and mine are different, right? And so there's all
Yep.
of these things that I just think that my bottom line and how I practice is that everybody needs a different individualized treatment plan for them.
Yes.
I don't personally believe, there are therapists who will say, oh, CBT is the answer. For
Yes.
CBT is proven efficacious in a lot of ways, but for many trauma survivors, that's not going to be the best, most informed therapy for them. And
Oh.
there may be some that there are, but so the point is that we're all unique and we all require these individualized approaches. And I don't like when practitioners try to sell people a bag of bullshit about just do my approach. Like that is suspect to me.
Mhm.
Number one, but number two, to your point of like, being in the healthcare system as a professional patient, we know how bad it sucks. And so it's like, that's the other thing in terms of like, well, if there's studies that this works great, well, how is that going to be? Are people going to have access to that? Is this a realistic treatment modality for a lot of people? Because, I would die without my cancer treatment, but sometimes they don't want to cover it. So it's
Right.
like, I mean, it's the Wild West out there. So there are definitely practical implications as well. So
Well, and
yeah, no, go ahead.
I have to wonder too sometimes, specifically with Scheana, her talking about wanting to get off Zoloft and wanting to do microdosing. Microdosing seems to be very heavily talked about in their friend group and maybe
Yeah.
in the reality space. So I have to wonder, I'm just curious if and we'll talk about this with the rest of the VPR cast, if there's almost an element of them being scared of being
Hmm.
on an antidepressant or an SSRI because they're afraid of how it's going to affect them on the show. And
Right.
so that's a whole, you know what I mean? That's a whole other
Mhm.
topic itself. But it's just interesting because I feel like I keep hearing other people talk about microdosing, microdosing,
Mhm.
microdosing. And I just have to wonder if that's part of what they're thinking with, so specifically with people on
Sure.
reality shows.
And Lindsay, that's such a brilliant point because, of course, it's like, VPR talks about like, Tom wants to like, do shrooms and like swim naked, and everyone wants to like go to Coachella. And here's the thing, I'm not trying to be a shady bitch, but it's like, there are there is a group think about what's cool versus what isn't when it comes to drugs, and it's
Yeah,
like that is really dangerous and hypocritical and just like uninformed, in my opinion. It's like,
yeah,
if you are going to, as a 40-year-old man, define yourself, like define life being lived by like how many shrooms you do, like that I think we got to look at that. That is a why. So your point is very valid, and I think again why using our platform is so important, because all of the people that heard those messages, I want them to hear these too,
yeah,
to at least give them the other side of that coin, right? So
yeah.
let's start talking about the EMDR, because Scheana talked a lot about EMDR. And I know she talked about it on Jeff Lewis and from Almost Adulting podcast.
Hmm.
So maybe let's read a little bit of what she said about that, and then I can talk about EMDR and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, it's interesting because she also sounds like she's in individual therapy, and she has talked about how she's had a really good experience with EMDR. And so she was on the Almost Adulting podcast, and she talked about how it's really helped her dig deep and recognize specifically, and trigger warning, she talks about her miscarriage and how she had a lot of guilt when it came to that. And EMDR really helped her with that. And so she started in September, I believe, of last year, and she's had several since sessions. And I'm glad you're going to talk about EMDR because that's one thing in my grad program. We really didn't talk a lot about it, and but
Mm,
people who specifically shadowed people who did it or were going into that, they did. And I just wish we had more of an overview on that because I do think it's interesting.
mm-hmm.
But she quoted, each time we try to focus on something a little different, and it just overall really helped me. I think feel mentally stronger and being able to talk about traumatic experiences without completely breaking down and crying every single time. So she did one, and then later she had another one, and then six later she's had another one. And so she's felt like she's made so much progress in those. And then, but then also she's in talk therapy, and she said that she hasn't scheduled an EMDR in a while, but she's looking to do that again.
Okay. So I'm going to explain what EMDR is. And so in my practice, the last private practice that I was in, there were people who were trained. You have to be trained, you have to be certified, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole process. And listen, to your point, I also went to grad school so long ago, which makes me feel 100 years old. But like, this wasn't a thing,
I think,
really.
yeah, it's relatively new, right?
Well, yeah, the science for sure is new. And, as you know, all good scientific clinically based approaches, it takes years of trials and this and that.
Right.
And so it may have been in its infancy, but we certainly did not learn about it. And so what
Right.
I learned about it was from being in the field with good clinicians who practiced it. And in fact, I actually, there's ways to get certified. It's insanely expensive, like
I've
thousands
heard.
and thousands and thousands of dollars. However, so EMDR, it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And what I will say about EMDR is that it is conditionally recommended by the American Psychological Association clinical practice guideline for the treatment of PTSD. So it really is a good evidence-based approach, and I know people who have had a ton of success with
Oh,
it.
good.
So I'm going to explain a little bit more because it is complex. It's not just eye movements. It's confusing. So it's a structured therapy that encourages the patient to briefly focus on the trauma memory while simultaneously experiencing bilateral stimulation. So that means like eye stimulation, looking one way, then another, and one way, and then another, which is associated with a reduction in the vividness and emotion associated with the trauma memory. So during EMDR therapy, the clinical observations suggest that an accelerated learning process is stimulated by the standardized procedures, which incorporate the use of those eye movements or tones or taps. Like there's some tapping, there's some lights, there's some eye movement, and all therapists do it differently, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily all integrate all of this. It's just, sometimes it's personal preference. So while the client briefly focuses on the trauma memory and simultaneously experiences bilateral stimulation, the vividness and emotion of the memories are reduced. So
Okay.
that's how it works with the brain to reduce that trauma memory. It was so back to our point of like, this is newer. So it was initially developed in 1987, believe it
Oh,
or
okay.
not, for the treatment of PTSD, and is guided by it's called the adaptive information processing model. So it's been around, but like I said, by the time there were research trials and participants and longitudinal studies, now it's at that point where it's used more freely.
Mm-hmm.
And so to Scheana's experience, what I can say, it is usually delivered 1 to 2 times per week of a total of 6 to 12 sessions, although some people benefit from fewer sessions. And that, like, individual, right, it's an individualized treatment plan, so
Yeah.
that's the structure of it, but it can be done anyway. So here's, while it is great, I also need to give the other side of the coin. The limitations is, unlike other treatments that focus directly on addressing the emotions under the trauma, it focuses more on the memory and changing the way that the memory is stored in the brain. So
Mm.
do you see what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah. It's more so as Sheena said, when she either has a memory or something, her reaction to it may not be as big, but it's not necessarily getting to the core of
boom, yes.
all of it. Okay.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so, my clinical practice, I believe truly and wholeheartedly, the only way out is through.
Mm-hmm.
And overthinking is usually the result of underfeeling. And so part of what we're talking about today with Scheana and some of these other Vanderpump people is that some folks, in the name of wellness, will try to use half measures. And I'm not saying EMDR is a half measure, let me be clear, but they
Right.
sometimes use half measures because they're afraid, and I was too, of feeling those super painful emotions that trauma work really does. It digs that
Yeah.
up. But in my opinion, as someone who has been a patient and a practitioner, I've worked with people in trauma informed therapy to do the work, and I've done it with my own therapist. I can tell you the only way out is through. So while EMDR has such amazing applications, I believe that, again, for long term lasting change, it's best used in addition with other treatment modalities. And
Yes.
like you said, Scheana does that. She does individual therapy in addition to EMDR and, the brain health and things like that. So Scheana is a good example of someone who is doing the work and working on multiple treatment modalities. I just didn't want that message to get lost in some of the more wild stuff that is being talked about around this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think honestly, this could be a beautiful combination of the MDR, because if you are having such an intense reaction to flashbacks or to memories or whatever, you do kind of need to get to a place where, and then in individual therapy, you can talk about that. So I think the
Sure.
two together is
Yeah.
a really good combination. And as we've talked about, it sometimes sucks, right? 'Cause sometimes I just want to be like, I don't want to do all this. Like I'm
Oh, yeah.
tired. But
Oh, yeah.
to really get to those thoughts and behaviors and feelings, it is a combination. It can be a combination. Usually not, I mean, it can happen, but not just one size fits all. It usually is a combination of therapy, of a different type of therapy,
Hmm.
of medication and things like that.
Yeah.
But as we said, it's interesting specifically with the VR people, other measures or other things they talk about, they try to steer so far away from those things
Right.
than the, and again, everyone is different, but it's just, but they're also then yelling at each other to get therapy, which fascinates me.
Well, and it doesn't fascinate me because therapy, and this is part of why people are so mean to me online, it's like weaponized. It's
Yes,
like,
it
so
is.
so people are like, well, you're a therapist, so therefore you should be a robot. You should have no personality. You should never be shady. You should never have make jokes. You should like therapists aren't robots, and people who
Yeah,
are in therapy, it's like a punchline. And so I'm here to change that because I think ultimately people who are afraid of dealing with their stuff, right, they project that onto other people. And so it's really easy to look at someone and be like, you need therapy, and ignore your own stuff. But you
yeah,
said something really important before that I just want to touch on before we move on to some of the other quotes and things that we have from some therapy gaffes of VPR, is that healing sucks. It's the greatest gift and also the most painful. It's so hard.
yeah,
So I'm just here to normalize that and to say that, like, there are some days where I don't know about you, but I left my therapist's office feeling worse than when I walked in, and that is a normal part of the process. We have to believe and be confident in our ability to survive the journey. And I've done a lot of therapy personally. I've provided a lot of therapy professionally. And what I can tell you is no one has ever died from feeling intense emotions. You feel like you might, and it
yeah,
feels so overwhelming that you're like, I can't do this, but you can. It's healing is possible. And I do just want to give that message. So for people who are listening that are like, this sucks and it's hard, yeah, join our club. We'll get together once a week. Oh, we do. It's
yes.
called Your Bish Therapist Podcast.
There
Right.
you go.
Right. So, okay, so let's move on to Lyndsay got together. She again did the Lord's work and got together some quotes and some situations from different Vanderpump Rules people throughout, the last few years. So, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the Jacks of it
Ye-
all?
Yeah. So Jax's situation is really interesting because we have seen on the show Jax go to therapy
Right.
many times. And but the way that he talks about therapy, specifically on his podcast, is he is not into it. He doesn't like it. He doesn't. And it's interesting too because him and Brittany, right, are
Hmm.
separating. And Brittany has recently said if he makes the changes
That's right.
and maybe we can work it out. So I'm curious. I'm just speculating. I'm curious if she has brought up to him couples therapy. I can only imagine his
I
reaction
would
to that.
I'd be willing to bet that was a yeah, you
Now,
know.
where I will give Jax a little bit of credit because something really, in my opinion, and I'm sure yours, unethical
Oh
happened
my God, yes.
is, and it's so hard because seeing therapy on a show. Now, I will say in the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and Kyle's, that was her real therapist, right? That
Right.
she's been to for a while. I feel like that showcased a really beautiful moment.
Yeah.
But with this Vanderpump people, it's usually these. I'm guessing they have to be somewhat qualified. Like I would surely hope so. These therapists in and
I don't know.
out,
I don't know.
they someone off the street they bring in, and we just see them on and off the show. But with Jack specifically in season one, he had a therapist, and Kristen told the story because I know
Right.
with Jax, people are like, can't believe anything he says. But,
Right.
but Kristen specifically told the story of she was at a bar with Carmen, and the therapist that Jax saw was there. She was super wasted, which, hey, as a therapist, what you do off the clock, you know what I mean? That,
Yeah.
but she was wasted and she came up to them and was talking to them, spilling the tea, quote unquote, about Jax and then talking about it with other people.
Dude.
That is just the confidentiality is
Dude.
that in the room with us? Because it sure is not. And so that will deteriorate someone. Not that I think Jax really wanted to go to therapy, if I'm honest. Maybe he did, but
Mm-hmm.
that definitely does not help if you have a situation like that. Even on a
No.
reality show, there is a right to privacy in that sense. And for someone,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure he signed a lot of waivers. And so for someone to then go off and talk about him like that, that's not okay.
Dude, it is so. Here's the thing. Fun fact, I didn't really watch VPR while Jax was on because I feel allergic to him personally. But
Yes.
but justice for Jax, because that is insanity. Like that makes my, as a therapist, that that makes my blood boil, because what upsets me so much is that the reason that people get scared of therapy is things like this, right? They see
Yes.
ultimately therapy works best when there is a trusting therapeutic rapport. I believe that the relationship is so important. And there are some people who don't agree with that. But for me, the relationship is valuable and protective and transformative, and it should be sacred, regardless of ethics and confidentiality. Like that's just basic Psych 101 stuff. But it's
Hmm.
also just like, what is up with you as a person that like you would even represent yourself that way or think. And so I think it's good for us to talk about it, because many of us, and I'm going to share briefly, myself included, have had bad experiences with a therapist. So I will share two quick things. I had one therapist once who fell asleep while I was talking.
Oh my goodness. I think you've shared that before. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
insane.
Literally. And the second therapist was smoking a brisket during a telehealth session.
Just making dinner.
Literally. And here's the thing, because even I was like, okay, listen, it was during the pandemic, right? We were all home. Maybe she needed to make dinner, but that wasn't it. She not only was like smoking the brisket, she was like explaining to me what she was doing. And I'm like, do you think I care right now about what it is you're doing? Like, are you out of your mind? And
Mm.
so I just share this because don't allow a crappy therapist to stop you in your relentless pursuit of self growth and improvement. Please don't.
Yeah. Well, and
And it's hard,
oh
and I
God.
get it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think it is so okay, and it's hard because you do like with the doctor, my God, and I know you have the doctors that I've had to go through to finally
Ugh.
find one to listen to me. It
Mm-hmm.
took almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And for a therapist, it can be the exact same. I had the most wonderful, the greatest therapist, the one who diagnosed with the PTSD, and we did a lot of damn work when I was in grad school because I had a
Yeah.
moment where I just had a mental breakdown.
Sure.
And after that, because she was connected with the school, so I tried to
Mm-hmm.
find a different therapist. And the next one I had, we just did not click, and she wasn't making brisket, but she
But it just wasn't a
like
fit.
yeah, and
Yeah.
like specifically, and I've worked with kids before, you very much want to meet clients where they're at. And I feel like with her, I would be talking to her, and I understand as a therapist, you try to make connections with what they're saying and draw conclusions. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like when I was talking to her, she would say things that I wasn't even thinking. Like, for example, for specifically, we were talking about something when I was pregnant. I had a lot of death. I had 3 deaths in my family while I was pregnant, and I
Oh,
was talking,
gosh.
and I was talking about that, and I was talking a little bit. I gave a brief history about the childhood trauma that I experienced,
Mm-hmm.
but I was talking about my pregnancy and stuff. I kid you not, randomly brought up, "Are you afraid you're going to parent like your stepdad parent you?" And I was like, "Well, now I am."
Oh, no.
Like
Oh,
that.
no.
And now here's the thing: if I would have brought that up on my own, and as a therapist, sometimes we draw wrong conclusions, and I love when a client calls you out on that. It's like, that's not what I meant. But
Right.
it wasn't, I'm like, how did you even get that? And no, now the person that I
That's
am
wild.
definitely gonna be thinking about that. So like we just weren't a good match. She could be a great therapist for someone else, but not for me. But
Right.
what I was trying to get at is I knew I needed to just tell her, like, it wasn't
Right.
a good fit.
Right.
That is so hard to do, specifically for me. I don't like confrontation or what I think could be
Hmm.
confrontation. I'm a people pleaser, but
Hmm.
I really encourage you people who, if you are looking for a therapist and it just doesn't feel like a good fit, you have the right, same with a doctor, to get another therapist. And trust me, I get it. It is frustrating. If you need to take a break, I need to take a break. I'm finding one, but I really do believe there is someone out there for you.
Preach, Lyndsay. Preach, sister. I can't say it enough how valuable that input is. And for people, listen, you look at me, right? I'm confident. I am assertive. Some might say a little too much, but I still had a hard time firing my therapist because and guess what? Spoiler alert, she did not handle it well at
Oh
all. No,
no.
oh, that's a whole other story. Maybe we can tell at another time, but
Brisket or sleep or
brisket.
okay.
Brisket didn't handle it well.
Ooh.
Yeah. The sleep one, I will say, I was young and wasn't confident enough, so I ghosted. Um,
Oh, yeah.
and the brisket, I was older and had enough confidence, and so yeah, like and I've had to fire doctors that, right? Like I've literally walked out of medical appointments where I'm like
Yeah.
being gaslit and I'm like, I'm not sitting here and doing this. So my message to people to piggyback on what you're saying is that you know you better than anybody else. There is no medical professional who knows you better than you. And so if they're trying to tell you about you or trying to steer this or do that and you listen to your gut, and it is okay to fire someone and move on. That's okay.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I found my current therapist who is literally a light in the darkness. She is the perfect fit. I wouldn't know what to do without her. I am so grateful for her every day. So don't give up, number one. But number two, I do want to take the opportunity to share some tips and tricks about maybe where to find therapists. I
Yeah.
feel bad. People are always asking me if I'm practicing. They're like, I wish you could be my therapist. I'm like, that's so sweet, but I just can't. Um, so there's a couple of things. Psychology Today, there's been a whole drama with BetterHelp for those people who are not aware of this. I might actually do a podcast on it. There have been allegations of a lot of wild stuff. And so I do not recommend BetterHelp at all.
Yeah. I think it could be I love the idea behind it,
Hmm.
specifically because we talked a lot about accessibility. Um, but I also have done my research on it and I cannot promote it as well.
Nope, it's trash. If they like I'm looking for podcast sponsors and if they were like, "Hey, we'd like to," I'd be like, "No. I have too much
Well,
integrity."
and
Mm-mm.
I think it's interesting again, the way that Jax talks about therapy. Guess what? One of their sponsorships has been before.
Yeah, of
BetterHelp.
course. Of
Yeah.
course. And in fairness, some folks that aren't tuned into the therapy world, they don't know that it's a platform that's taking advantage of people. But here's what I can recommend. Okay, so first of all, psychologytoday.com. They are a verified resource. Yet not anyone can get on there. You have to be verified. I joke that it's like Tinder for therapists, but without the sex.
Yeah. That's
And
so funny.
you can look at profile because here's the thing: to find a good fit, it's as much an interview for you, the
Hmm.
client. Is this person a good fit for me? So you can look through profile pictures and what is their area of focus. If you see a therapist who their area of focus is a mile long, that's usually not a great sign. Like
Yeah.
we can't be specialists in all of it. So but you can search by gender identity or insurance or what
Hmm.
have you. And what is beautiful about Psychology Today is you can directly reach out to them safely and securely, and a lot of them will offer pay scales. So based on your income, right? And by the way, if you're in therapy right now and it's financially hard, I encourage you to talk to your therapist. Most therapists should provide pay scales,
Yeah.
adjustment based on, right, your income and what you're earning, right? And if you're disabled and you're not earning an income, there are options for lower to no cost therapy. So always, look at that, number one. But number two, a hack for accessibility. I learned this when I was in my private practice. There are a lot of practices, maybe locally, that offer interns that
Yes.
provide little to no cost therapy. And here's why I think that is a underutilized resource. I would rather have an intern as a therapist than someone who's been in the field for 40 years, has not read one new page of research, is not up
Yep.
on any new scientific evidence or support, and hasn't learned a new skill in 40 years. I would rather someone who's hungry, who's being supervised,
Yes.
and who knows the latest and greatest stuff.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I don't know if people understand, like when you're an intern, like specifically for me right now, if I were to go back into the field, I don't have my LCSW. And so I would work under supervision with
Right.
someone. And even when you get your license, the big part of the field is supervision
Yeah.
and talking to people. It's a
Yep.
huge like resource that we have. So I think people get a little nervous when they see intern or master student, something like
Right.
that. But
Right.
they are working alongside people. And like you said, a lot of things, same with doctors, right? I rather have sometimes a new face doctor who is up on like what is new in medicine
Mhm.
than someone who I've had doctors before have not changed a damn thing in 60 years.
Literally.
So
Literally, yes.
yeah, it
Mhm.
is. Yeah, I think that's a great resource. And I will say too, any if your audience or anyone who's listening, if you have some like a kid that's in college, or if you're in
Mhm.
college yourself, a lot of colleges too have a resource of therapy. They offer that to their students. I know when I was in college, they had a counseling program. It's either free or
Yep.
they do a pay scale. Like mine specifically, they looked at my pay scale and you could pay $2, $4, $6,
Mhm.
and $10 a session. I think mine, I was in the $10 session, which is $10 a session for therapy. Like sign me up for that any day. And
Yeah.
so that is a huge resource. I don't think a lot of even college students recognize that is there.
Lyndsay, fun fact, I used to do that. I
Oh, you
was
did?
a yes, I was I've had a lot of different jobs in a lot of different areas, but my favorite job, I worked at a local college, and I was a therapist in, it was called the CAP Center.
Yes,
Um,
that's IUPUI. That's what it's called too, CAPS.
Yeah, yeah. And
That's
it
so
was
funny.
so all this it where I worked, all the students, and you're right, some of them had no idea. So what I was in charge of was doing outreach. So
Oh,
students
okay.
knew that this was available and things like that. And it was completely free. Completely free. There was no charge. And some of these college campuses will even, for, like you said, a small fee. If you're not a college student, they may offer
Yeah.
some services. So really, it's always going on the internet, looking what's local to you, making some calls and figuring it out. But the one thing I like to say is that I am human and I have a lot of insecurities, but the one thing that I can say is I'm great at what I do. And I was once new and I was still great then. So
Yeah.
don't sleep on, new, younger, people, students, what have you. But yeah, it was honestly my favorite job in the world. And I ended up having to leave because uh, a Southern gentleman came in and really tried to tell me that I talked too much and I was too loud. Yeah. So,
Oh, no.
yeah, I had to go ahead and quit that job. But again, that's a story for another day. So, Lyndsay, here's the thing. We I feel like we could talk for hours.
Yes.
But to wrap up a little bit, because we have talked about so much, any last thoughts, feeling, anything else that maybe we didn't get to talk about that you wanted to briefly touch on? Um, Anything at all?
I mean, I think specifically with this season of VPR, we are seeing a lot of talk about mental health
Hmm.
and about all because these people have went through a wild year, and I'm sure a lot of us have as well. And just know, as we said before, we recognize the privilege with therapy and accessibility. That's when the grad school I really struggled with because I was in a room of people who wanted to be therapists, but I was seeing so much of the disconnect between people actually being able to get therapy. And
Right.
that's what led me into thinking maybe I wanted to go more into policy
Right.
because there is just so much. But recognizing that, and then also recognizing that, it's not for everybody. But the people, specifically people in the limelight, right, with Scheana and these celebrities, when you promote these things like Dr. Amen's thing, it seems like it's a magic wand. And I really wish there was that with mental health, but it's just not that. And specifically, when you have something that costs thousands of dollars, that is a book, that is a course, that is pills, and all these things, it just, I know I had people in my comments being like, "I've never heard of this before. Like, what is this?" And I encourage people to do their own research and to go on your own journey. But I think this podcast was important to do to get this information out here because with his specific stuff, there's a lot of questionable things with it. And while everyone can do what they need, and again, Sheena's saying she thinks it's helping, that's great for her, but she's also doing a lot of other things too that I
Right.
think is helping her as well. So it's like,
Right.
which one is actually working? But as we said, it can be a combination of things. But I hope what people, take away from this podcast is, everyone's on their own journey, but it's also good to have the information that is needed for that journey.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, preach. You could I don't know if I have anything else to say. Like, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think one of the only things that I'll add that you and I had talked about was that whether or not you feel therapy is for you, I do think it's important to have some sort of guide, to have
Yes.
a informed, trusted support. And one thing that I've talked about on a lot of these podcasts is that for survivors of, and trigger warning, for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, there are a lot of free confidential resources. RAIN.org, there's chats, there's, hotlines and things to call in. So whether it's an advocate, a professional advocate, a personal advocate, whatever it is, I just think that we as humans deserve the gift of wellness,
Hmm.
true happiness and wellness, even Jax, even Tom. We
Yep.
all deserve to have good wellness and be in a good mental health space. So I'm just grateful so much for you. I feel like this has been such a wonderful and important episode. And, maybe we'll have to do another one at some point about, some of this other stuff because, contrary to what Tom Sandoval says, like an ice bath isn't going to cut it. That's not, and this is
Oh,
this is shady, Melissa, but like an ice bath with, your friend watching you ain't it. It's it ice baths are great and they have a lot of, helpful things. But to your point and to our point is that advocate for yourself, look into a multifaceted approach, and just take it one step at a time because we're worth it.
yeah.
So, with that note, I'm going to thank Lyndsay so much. Please, again, follow her on Instagram at Vanderpodrecaps,
Thank you.
TikTok, same name, and Reddit. Again, can you share?
Oh boy, it's additional war. Let me look at the numbers real quick. Additional war 8759.
Okay. So please follow Lyndsay, give her a shout out. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lyndsay. I've had so much fun, appreciated you. And I'm just going to read my disclaimer real quick.
Yep.
Disclaimer, posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.